Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 Virtual Hop and Brew School. My name is Kate Scott. I am the Global Communications Manager at Yakima Chief Hops, and I am honored to introduce you to Patrice Palmer for this session. Patrice is an award-winning diversity, equity, and inclusion educator and motivational coach. They are an adjunct professor at the Colorado State University, as well as the DEI specialist for New Belgium Brewing. This is such a crucial topic for the craft beer industry, the hop industry, and just as humans in general. We are all here to listen and learn for this seminar that Patrice has cleverly titled, Getting into TRUBle, Managing and Moving Through the Missteps of Unintended Harm. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Patrice.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Yakima, for allowing me to speak to you all. We are turning on the comments, the chat function. One, because we definitely want this to be an interactive space. Usually in spaces like this, we are engaged together in the same room, utilizing each other's lived experience and our energy in order to talk about things like this. But unfortunately, I cannot be with you today, but that does not mean that the interaction has to stop. So if I am saying stuff that is really like clicking with you, I want the snaps in here. Yes, thank you. I want to hear those things. If it's not, if questions are starting to pop up, please do, because we're going to do an interactive question and answer at the end. So I'll be talking for about 30 to 45 minutes, and then I want to open the floor for folks to have good conversation. So with that being stated, let us begin, and I'll share my screen now. All right. So hopefully folks can see it. Before we even get started with anything, the first thing I like to make sure that I am doing is creating a space that folks feel empowered to bring their entire selves to. I don't want to say that I will create a safe space for you, because I can't guarantee that every one of your identities will always feel safe. There may be something that is said or done where you're like, I don't really like how that feels. And I can't gauge what feels safe for you. So I love to use Dr. Brene Brown's The Power of Vulnerability text when I talk about creating a brave space. So what I can guarantee you as a facilitator in this conversation is that I will make sure to understand and honor the boundaries that are given. I want to be respectful and reflective of the processes learned within this space. I want you to be able to advocate for yourself as well as each other. All right. I also want to make sure that we ensure that personal things are vaulted and confidential as needed. Folks may be sharing pieces of themselves that they've never shared before. I want that sharing to feel brave. And I don't want things that are said here taken from here. I want things that are learned here. If you learn something, I want that to be taken back to your various spaces that you are coming from. But most importantly, I want to make sure that we empower everyone to be themselves and accept others for who they are and where they are on this journey of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We are at differing levels, and it does not take away anything from anybody if your level may be a little bit more advanced, where you're advocating on a regular basis, or you just say, you know what, I don't like how things are showing up in my space, and I want to do something different about it. I don't care where you are on your journey. Understand it's a journey and not a destination. All right. And so together we're going to get to where we need to go. But before we start out, create a brave space for your companions in the space with you, as well as your colleagues and other industry professionals. Create that brave space before you start really delving deep into some real personal stuff. So I definitely say take that as a gem that you walk away with today. That's something that's been learned here. With that, how can I talk about DEI, managing missteps, talking through some critical things without even knowing who I'm talking with, right? So what I need you to do is hopefully You knew that you were going to be talking to someone who teaches on a regular basis, so you brought some stuff with you. So hopefully you have a pen, you have something to write on, and you can begin to speak your truth. So what I'm going to ask you to do right now for the next 3 to 4 minutes is I want you to write you. What that means is put your name in the center or something that represents you. That could be a nickname, that could be a picture of yourself. I don't care. Whatever represents you, put that in the center. And I want you to begin to write around in a circle, just like you see here, some things that are your truth, phrases that describe you. So I use myself for example, I identify racially as Black, but culturally I identify as Gullah Geechee. Where those folks are from, they're from the Sea Islands of South Carolina. And if I like you enough, you might hear that tongue start to slip a little bit and you hear some of that Geechee stuff to come out, you know? I identify as queer. I identify as a non-binary transgender person. I do not use any other pronouns other than they, them. I consider myself an academic. I've been in academia for many, many years. I'm a spouse. I'm a fur parent. I'm a sibling. I'm a person that has high anxiety as well as suffers from depression. Those are things that are about me, and they shape the way that I come into spaces. And so for right now, what I'm asking you all to do is begin to write down those things. And some of you, if you feel the need, the gumption, the fearlessness, I ask that you put some things about yourself in the chat. Who are you? How would you describe yourself? What is your truth? So I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to do that. And again, I invite anyone who wants to put in the chat some things about themselves to do so. But if not, grab something to write with and to write on and speak your truth. Speak it now. As folks are writing things down and they're putting it in the chat, I want to tell you a little story about truth. Again, I said I'm from the Sea Islands. Gullah Geechee is where I am, hailing from South Carolina by way of Edisto Island. And so on the island of Edisto, and I go with a family friend that we're taking to the doctors. It's just a doctor's appointment. She is one of those folks where I say she's been old my whole life. And so it's definitely an elder within our family and in our community. And so I know her as Miss Fibian. That's how I know her. That's how I've always known her, Miss Fibian. So I was taking Miss Fibian to her doctor's appointment, and as she was getting out of the car, she drops her pocketbook in the floor. And I go to help her kind of get things up as she's trying to make her appointment, and I see her ID. Now, again, I've only known this woman as Miss Fibian. I look at the name, and it says Phoebe Ann. And I'm like, Miss Fibian, how you say your name? And she starts to laugh. She said, what you think is pronounced? And I said, Miss Fibian, it says Phoebe. Phoebe. I don't know how you got that wrong. I don't know how you mispronounced that part of your name. Miss Fibian looked me dead in the face and she said, I know who I am, and no name or pronunciation is going to change who I am. Do you know who you are? And at that moment, I realized this woman that I love, this woman that I respected, I was trying to speak her truth for her. Why? Because I thought she didn't understand. But that's not true. Miss Fibian knew herself more than I could ever say I knew myself at that time. And so when I ask you to do things like this, I ask you to know who you are, because you will have to encounter folks who tell you that's not who you are. And you got to know it on the inside in order to reflect that, because when you are managing a misstep, you cannot have empathy for other folks if you can't have empathy for yourself. So you have to learn how to love you respect you, honor you before you can give that to someone else. And so again, thank you for those who put in the chat their truth. Thank you for those who wrote and may not want to share it at this time, but they know that their truth is something that is memorable, that is needed, and will carry them through. So one of the things that I was able to do in this conversation was to talk about one of the elephants that have been in social media rooms everywhere. And what is that? Cancel culture. Everybody knows cancel culture, right? And so with cancel culture, I want you all to think about something. I want you to start describing what is cancel culture, because we see it all the time. Is cancel culture an accountability tool or a social media nightmare? What is this thing, this phenomenon that has struck everyone all over the planet? And the third thing I want you to think about is, do you think it's fair to cancel a person or a company based off of their past content? Because again, we're talking about managing missteps, right? Is this something that we can do? And as we begin to talk through this conversation today, I want you to keep in the forefront of your mind, what's the difference between canceling somebody and holding them accountable for what they say? Because those things are not always the same, but you can't go forward until you know where you came from. So let's give a little bit of history on cancel culture. Cancel culture arose out of the need for people who were marginalized to be able to have their own voice. We see it prominently in the Black empowerment movements of the 50s and 60s. It is used as a way to boycott a company or an idea or ideology that folks feel does not resonate with the shared and lived experiences and reality of folks who have been marginalized. A linguistics professor from the University of California, Santa Barbara, has likened the act of canceling someone to a boycott. She said it also promotes the idea that marginalized people should be empowered to reject pop culture that spreads harmful ideas. A quote from Dr. Charity Hutley says, if you don't have the ability to stop something through a political means, what you can do is refuse to participate. Social media is a powerful tool. Why? Because it brings two main objectives: influence and reach. Over 2.5 billion people monthly use apps and platforms. 2.5 billion people. Remember, there's only 7.5 billion people on the planet, and 2.5 billion of them are on social media. So social media has a huge influence as to what can be said, done, felt, and in real time. I was just joking with some of the staff from Yakima, and I said, what time is it where you are? Because I'm in Colorado. And my phone, my Fitbit, and my computer have all different times. I don't know what time I'm in. Social media makes it feel like we are actually at the same time doing the exact same thing. So within cancel culture, that elephant that is in social media, people are afraid to say and do things that other people may find misleading, misinformed, downright racist, let's name it, be transparent with it, downright homophobic, sexist. We're trying to figure out how we don't step into those things. And the best way in order for us to go through that is to look at where we came from. And I like to bring into the space the cycle of socialization. Why do I want to bring in the cycle of socialization? Because that's why you do the things that you do. You have been socialized to believe certain things, values, morals, norms, your expectations of what other people will do are come from how you have been socialized from the beginning. From the beginning. If you look on this chart, you'll see from the beginning, you didn't have anything. This is from birth. But that first real socialization is coming from the people that you love. That's family, relatives, parents, teachers. The folks who you trust the most are the folks who influence you the most as well. And they actually set up what your guidelines are for how you'll interact with other people. Then you go into institutions that reinforce those things. And more specifically in how they reinforce those things, they enforce how you may be punished when you sway from the line. And we realize what we can and can't say, how much space we can take up, how we show up in the world, how our salient identities play into how other people judge or open doors for us. But today, what I'm asking of you is you got two options. That is direction of change or stay in the course. Your direction of change allows you to interrupt some of the things that you know based on what was given to you. It allows you to reframe and question, and most importantly, take a stand as to who you are and why you are doing the things that you do. Why? Because when you misstep, you have to know what you don't know and what you know. And you got to be honest enough to say, I didn't realize I said it and I was wrong. And that's really hard for people to have to do and have to say. Why? Because nobody intends to cause harm. Not in an everyday situation. You don't intend to do that. But cancel culture says the minute you do it, it's all on social media. I know everything about it. So what happens when that fear is overriding? It stops us from learning and it makes us too afraid to change. We'll become silent because we don't want to get in trouble. Remember, that was reinforced through institutions. So again, as you're thinking about this, how do I handle this, Patrice? You're telling me to get into good trouble. Why would I want to do that? Why? Because it opens up doors that can absolutely change perspectives. One more thing I want to bring to the attention before we really jump into some other things is around the unconsciousness, but really the consciousness that makes us unaware of things. I love the phrase thoughts become things. Why? Because what you think, you do. No matter what your mouth says, no matter what your heart says, what you think is what you do. And a lot of times we have lived through a stereotype of different things. We have stereotypes for everything, for how people drive, how they dress, what they eat, how they smell, where they live, what car they drive. We know. We work in an industry where we can tell you about a patron based on the beer that they drink, because we know what the stereotype is associated with it. And unfortunately, when we don't attack those stereotypes, we begin to unconsciously mitigate them. We do them. We begin to operate as though they are truth. I always say I came into beer by accident. I don't even like beer. I'm going to say it. I know I might not be able to get any more opportunities to work with craft beer leaders and professionals, but I don't actually like beer. That was not, I didn't go in because I actually like beer. I really like people. That's actually why I do what I do. I actually like people. And it just so happens that a beer is what's bringing us together. Awesome. But that's not what I went in for. And so I had my own stereotype of who drinks craft beer. I live in Colorado. I work at New Belgium. Ain't that many people that look like me. Ain't that many people who have my lived experience. I can't name you 5 queer, non-binary, transgender folks who are in craft beer right now, who also hold the identity of Blackness. I can't tell you that. So I have a stereotype I had, and I actively go against that stereotype all the time. But what did that do? That unfortunately gave me a prejudgment of what I thought people were doing. And it began to shape my behavior. It absolutely began to shape my behavior. And through that, consciously, I was not doing it, but unconsciously, my actions began to showcase what I thought about other people. Thoughts become things. When someone would make a comment, I'm like, yeah, I already knew he was going to say that because of, and I could run off a laundry list of identity. So again, before we can jump into what makes us different and stand out, we have to think of it from that perspective. How do you move through those missteps? How do you address and acknowledge in real time? You got to call yourself in to be able to do that. We have perfected the opportunity to call people out, but very rarely have we actually put time and energy in calling ourselves in. And we got to call ourselves in order to change the way that we think, consciously or unconsciously. You have to learn how to manage, but you can't manage if you don't know what you're working with. Avoidance is not what this conversation is about. You cannot avoid people enough to never, quote unquote, get in trouble. You will. The purpose is, what do you do with it when it happens? What happens when you are right there in the thick of it? What do you do? Will you try to assert yourself and say, I didn't do it and I don't want to talk about it? Or are you going to acknowledge the hurt that happened, either consciously or unconsciously, and then work together to move through it? I tell people all the time, most folks have every intention, no matter what the day has played out to be, to get home at the end of the day. That's what they intend to do. If they hurt somebody in that attempt to go home, it never mitigates what has happened. I know you're still trying to go home, but that has nothing to do with the trauma that has caused me. So at what point do you stop saying I was trying to and say I actually did? That's how we manage. Acknowledgement in the moment. Or sometimes you do things that you don't even realize that you've done it. And somebody else comes back to you later and says, hey, did you know that you said you did? This is how I felt. Instead of trying to vindicate ourselves, acknowledge it. That was not my intention, but obviously I see that it hurt you. Let me make a mental note so that I won't continue to traumatize you or to continue to do that behavior that has hurt you. We would do it for anybody else. That's one of the reasons I keep saying, I need to know who you are. Because if I know who you are, I could then know how you begin to move through things like this. So again, continue to think through this. We only have a very short time together, and hopefully I'll be able to answer your questions. But I really want folks to really sit with the understanding of what it means to manage and acknowledge the missteps that we have. So with this, Patrice, you've been talking too much. It's time for y'all to talk to me. And I'm going to use the thing that, this is like the scariest thing for people to have conversations about. And let's talk about race. Oh, Fo, I can feel it. I don't even have to see you all right now. I can feel people shifting in their chairs. They're like, this is not what I signed up for. I said I was coming with my friend to see this, and now we're talking about race and being non-inclusive. That is not what I intended on doing. But it's real. And if we don't begin to learn how to do this here, we're going to unintentionally inflict harm on other folks later. So let's use this time to be intentional, because most folks say, I didn't say it or I didn't do it because I didn't know what I was supposed to say. I didn't know what I was supposed to do in the moment. So right now we're at a training ground. And the training ground is we're going to make a script. Thinking about what has happened, what we've done, what we would do if someone questioned us about something that we said or did. And I really want to go put your eyes to the third question that's on here. If you witness a racist or non-inclusive behavior from a colleague, how would you react? What might you say to them in that moment? That's where I want us to put our focus right now. That's what I want us to write a script for. Because a lot of times unintended harm happens when a bunch of people are around. I remember I had an event where I had a lot of different people who were talking to me, and I had a guy who was very angry about what I had spoken about. He came to me, I could see it. His face was red. He was in a posture position. I see this probably ain't gonna go well. But in my head, I'm like, it's about 50 people in this room with me. It's not about to turn ugly. And me and this man went to town. I mean, he started calling me everything but by my name, telling me that I was sane, I was race baiting, I'm a racist, I hate anybody who's not Black. I mean, he was going in. And I had 50 people who watched. And nobody said anything. And I really felt fear. There was a fear that was in me because I didn't know how it was going to turn out. And I was afraid because there were also people who were watching and no one stepped up. No one stepped between. No one put themselves in proximity with what I was going through, but they watched. And because I wanted to make sure I was safe, I remember let me keep my tone at one level. Let me make sure he sees my hands. Let me make sure I am positioning myself in a position that I don't feel that I'm threatening him. And I was able to calm him down, and we were able to have a civil conversation. We didn't agree on a lot of things, but we were able to have a civil conversation. And he walked off at a much different level than when he came to me. And of the 50 people who were standing there, immediately 15 people turned to me and said, oh, you handled that so well. Wow, he was really angry, wasn't he? Were you scared? Because I was scared. And I just remember looking at folks and I was like, how could you leave me there? How could you watch that? How could you wait? If it was one person that was so angry, but it was 51 of us who weren't, who could protect each other, why was that not the call to action? Why was the call to action to watch? And so I remember how I felt, and I'm pretty sure there are other folks who have similar stories or something that happened to them where they had to endure and nobody was there for them. Another way to manage a misstep is by being in the moment. even when it's scary. So that if someone is having an issue, that you are still there and present to make sure that no harm comes to that person physically, and maybe be able to de-escalate it so that no harm comes to them emotionally, or you can mitigate some of that harm that's happening. So I'm going to ask you to write. I'm going to give you 5 minutes to write. And I really want you to write something out. I don't want you to say, move on to the next slide when Patrice begins to talk again. But I really want you to understand what it means to get into good trouble, because good trouble is about understanding that our shared humanity is at stake. Not just Black folks, not just queer folks, not just folks of Asian and Latin descent, not just older folks, but all of us have a shared connection to ensure that no harm comes, or if harm is happening, to help to mitigate that. So again, this is your script. If you witness racist or non-inclusive behavior from a colleague, how would you react in the moment? What might you say to them to change? I'm asking you to dig deep. I'm asking you to be uncomfortable. But I want to make sure this is a brave space that empowers you to do the good. So I'm looking for it in the chat. I'm hoping that you all are writing it down. Thank you to folks who were able to share some cool stuff about themselves. Awesome, awesome, awesome. We're coming up on our Q&A in a few minutes. So hopefully you've written down some questions. Hopefully you have a situation or a scenario that has popped up that you're like, oh, we got to talk about this. Because this is a great space to grow and to learn. So again, I'm going to give us just a few more minutes to get this together as best as we can. And to continue to talk.
So we don't have any questions in the Q&A, but we'll give people a couple minutes to write down some thoughts in the chat function. I will kind of offer, if this is okay, if I kind of offer some of my thoughts, just going through some of the questions. I would say my first answer to number one would just be a fear of offending people. My answer to number two would be just being afraid of my own ignorance and not knowing kind of my blind spots in this subject, just as a white female. And then number three, just out of my own personality, I would absolutely step in front of the person to defend them. But I think I would be afraid of trying to make the other person change, only because, again, that ignorance and that blind spot, I wouldn't really know how to make them change. And it's that kind of like helplessness of like, I don't know how I would make this other person change. Their feelings and their opinions are very dramatic and very intense. So I kind of feel powerless in kind of having that lack of education and not knowing even like, how am I going to make this person change? They're like kind of off the rails. So those are kind of my answers, maybe empowering other people to put themselves out there. I see a lot of my coworkers on the attendees, and I love that because I think this is an important conversation for everyone, for organizations. And just as a communications professional, like it's extremely scary to talk on behalf of an organization. I think that's what, breweries can get out of this is, it's okay to make mistakes. Me as a communications professional on behalf of YCH, it's okay to make mistakes. And breweries on, talking on behalf of their breweries on social media, it's okay to make mistakes, and we shouldn't avoid the conversation due to that fear. So I really appreciate that sentiment. That's what I got out of this in the beginning, was just, all right. It's all right. It's okay to make mistakes, even if it's on behalf of the company. Like, that's how we learn. It's important to just admit that we knew we made that mistake, kind of thing. So
Absolutely.
Just adding my 2 cents.
No, and thank you. Again, if we were in a setting, we could really jump in and kind of unpack some of these things. But I think some of the things that you brought up were real, right? So why does it feel so hard to talk about race? Like, it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable. It absolutely is. I don't think there's ever a time where I could just say I have always felt completely comfortable in speaking about those things. And I think that's a really great thing to do that. The next is, what are we most afraid of about conversation shifts to race? I would say 95% of people that I have had conversations with when we talk about this, what they will tell you is, I do not feel comfortable in the subject matter. That's a real thing. And before we end this conversation, I'm going to talk about 4 E's. And one of those things is to educate ourselves past this. And so if it is okay with Yakima, I would love to give you all some resources that you all can possibly utilize to get that education continuously flowing with this and be able to share it out. And third, you brought in this word that I'm just like, it's making my ears ring. You're like, I want to make sure that I am helping the person that is being harmed, but how do I get this other person to understand where they were at the wrong? And it's interesting because we don't have to do that. What we need to do is to validate that experience. I totally I get that, but I need you to bring it down so that we can talk it through. I understand, ooh, this is feeling something for you, but I need you to bring it down a little bit so that we can talk through it. And if the person is so angry that they don't want to talk through it, as my partner would say, we use our words in this house. So that means that, hey, I'm gonna let you take a walk. Let's come back together and talk through this. I don't want the person who is being harmed to feel like they now have to fix this person and then apologize for their existence, but allow that person to take it in and try to figure out where all that is coming from. Because once you talk it out, it's kind of like talk therapy. You begin to bring stuff up and you're like, oh, you know what? We actually have that in common. Or I didn't know that's why this was a thing for you. I didn't know this was the issue for you. So that is great to be able to do that. So thank you so much for just bringing that into the space. And I'm seeing folks right. And I want to share with folks. Oh yes, y'all better answer all the questions. I love it. This is the teacher in me. I just want to give you all gold stars or something. But yeah, I love this wording. I always revert to the golden rule: treat others the way you'd like to be treated. In that situation where I witness a racist or non-inclusive behavior from a colleague, I would make a point to protect the individual taking the brunt of the situation and ask my coworker to reevaluate their actions. This is a tough situation, and I would like to think that I would step in some way. So right there, you writing that out already lets us know that now it's in the forefront of your brain. Sometimes we're like, oh, I think this is what I would want to do, but until you're in that situation, you don't know. So what do? We have simulations, fire drills. We are showing you where your exits are, showing you that if you get stuck, what you are supposed to do, because in the event when all your emotions are running, you only remember what you know, not what you think you know. So being able to run through this is a great exercise so that you know how to step up, you know how you keep yourself calm, and most importantly, how you keep yourself safe. Because that also is needed in these types of conversations. If someone is extremely angry or being very aggressive, and you got somebody coming in, you want to make sure that person also is safe as well. So thank you. I would also love to throw into and this is just a thought as the phrasing came up: treat others the way you'd like to be treated. I challenge it and I say, treat others the way they would like to be treated. Because there may be some things that you are like, that's totally not a problem for me. That could be absolutely heart-wrenching for myself. Pronouns are a big thing. I get really heavy dysphoria when I am constantly misgendered. She, her, she said that. Isn't that hers when you're referring to me? Now, you may not ever have that issue because you have always identified as this thing and you live your life as that. And it's not hard for people to be able to see that from you. I don't get that luxury all the time. And so I would love for folks to treat me in that way of how I am affected when my pronouns are used irregularly or I'm completely misgendered purposefully, because that unfortunately does happen as well. And there's a very clear difference between when someone made a mistake and when someone is trying to put me in my place. So that's just as you write that, I ask you to reframe it just a little bit. Think about it in a more expansive way. So thank you for sharing. Let's see. I don't know if any Q&A questions have gotten in, but I'm going to keep reading through. It doesn't feel difficult to talk about race for me, but I was raised having honest conversations about race. Lots of folks don't practice that. Absolutely, that practice piece, right? We don't practice it. As a matter of fact, what are the three things? I know everyone knows in their heads the three things you don't talk about: race, religion, and politics. You do not bring that up. Oh no. Even sometimes in the most liberal houses, they're like, you might not want to bring that into the space. You don't know how people are going to do. So practice really makes it normalized so that folks are like, oh, that makes sense. Didn't know that you felt that way. I now have a better understanding of folks. So yes, continue to practice. This says for number 2, I want to make sure I don't lead the conversation. I'm sorry. I'm white and I feel like it's more important to hear the voice of people of color on the topic. I'll certainly join the conversation, but it doesn't feel appropriate for me to lead the conversation. I think in some ways, in having conversations like this about race, especially from folks, if you've had honest conversations as a white person around race, your perspective is going to be completely different from mine. And you may want to have those conversations and say, this was my lived experience and this is how it worked for me, so that other people can say, oh, okay, that feels a little bit different than maybe what Patrice is saying as a person who's lived my entire life as a dark-skinned Black person. I have a very different lived experience, but I don't have the same experience as you talking about that, right? So you are bringing in a perspective that I have not even ever had to witness because it's not something that's in my saliency. So your perspective is totally valid. And I think just like we know different things and we can bring up different lived experiences that we had in a conversation, you can do the exact same thing. But sometimes you may have to take the brunt of that and lead it. And when I say that, because if other folks have your same shared identity and a person of color is the only one or the one of 5 in the space, it's a heavy weight. And you can easily say, hey, I would love to bring my perspective in as a white person who's talked about this. I believe that a lot of times, whoever that person of color is will yield the floor and say, hey, please provide that. So keep that in mind as you think through it. And last question is, yes, I would ask why. Make them explain, make them justify their racist behavior out loud. Hopefully this makes them uncomfortable, makes them think, makes them take time to hear themselves and how others hear them. And maybe they'll be open to having an open conversation about their behavior. Totally. I totally understand where you're coming from in that as well. You want folks to be able to, and sometimes I do, not just to justify it, but I want them to be able to hear it. I really want them to be able to hear it. And I do it for my own clarity. Because sometimes people will say things and you'll say it and it hits my ear as that was super racist, homophobic, sexist. And I start only concentrating on that part of it and I don't hear the rest of it. So sometimes I ask people, can you repeat what you said so that I know how to then address the conversation. So I'm again not addressing it only from my emotion of that hit my ear wrong, and we need to talk about that piece of it without the entire context. So again, that's a really good way of opening the conversation for the person to hear, but also for you to be able to clarify so that you're not misquoting or misinterpreting something because you only heard the piece that really resonated with you. But I do see there's a question. Ooh, I like this. Looks like I got two. All right. Okay. Let me jump in with the question. Is that okay, Kate? Okay, cool. So in your situation with the angry person, I like to think I would have helped, but I don't always know how to help without escalating the situation. I also don't want to assume that someone wants my help and jump in to save them. What steps can I take in these situations to show support without overstepping? Absolutely. I think you bring in some really great points. One, I don't. That's with anything. We see that sometimes when women are having an issue and a man steps in. Oh, I can help you with that, and they've never been asked to be helped. Right? They may just want some advice, but I didn't actually ask you to help me and take it away from me when I'm doing it. So in that situation, specifically as a person who is going through it, the escalation in our voices, the usage of some of the words that person was using were all for me saying this person is extremely angry and I may not be safe. What I would have liked as a person who was going through that particular issue would be for someone to stand next to me to say, hey, voices are really high. Can we bring those down just a little bit so that we can all understand? And I would have loved for other people to walk by me, next to me. What was that doing? One, it was making me remember I'm not in this alone. Two, it shows that there's more than one person that is not in total agreement with what is being stated. And then three, it also lets that person know that there are multiple people in this situation and it's only one of them. So sometimes when you just start seeing more people, if me and you having an argument and then you just start seeing 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 people walking up, you're like, how many people is a part of this conversation now? I'm gonna de-escalate because I'm trying to figure out why is it like 10 people? I was talking to one. Wait, what just happened? So one of those things could be just simply standing in the space and asking that person, I think this needs to come down just a little bit. Again, not trying to step over the person who is being harmed, but if you can hear it and this should be a one-on-one conversation, I think that's a great way to bring that down for folks. And so thank you for doing that, and then also checking in with that person afterwards. Just the same way that we would do it for any other space. If you see a woman that seems like she is being harassed, you would stay to watch to make sure that this doesn't escalate in a way that she is being harmed. You could also talk to her afterwards. And if you feel so bold and you may know the other person, talk to that person. Hey, I only heard the end of that and it sounded loud. I don't know what was going on, but I've not seen you that angry before. And I know if I saw it, other people did. That also allows the person to say, whoa, okay, I didn't realize I was giving that off. So hopefully that does answer your question. And I have another here. I usually ask if the person is okay with me stepping in. I do not want them to feel like I do not believe them. Do not believe they are capable of determining their own best path. I then usually say, I think we should all take a breath and organize our thoughts so we can talk about it more clearly. Then I usually say something like, it may not be intentional, but I fear your comments are hurtful toward me and others. How can I help you understand my point of view on this topic? Awesome. Well, you actually answered the question. I went through that look at you. Thank you for that. Absolutely do that. Make it a dialogue. I think that's a big part of what I would hopefully you're able to walk away with this is in managing and acknowledging missteps and unintended harm as well as intentional harm. We got to be able to talk to each other. Silence is no longer sufficient. All right. And so what we can do is to work together to ensure that folks have a better understanding and that we actually are moving toward a shared understanding. And also saying, you know what, we're going to have to disagree on this. Because sometimes folks don't want to have a dialogue, they want to be right. And that's not always what the case needs to be. And if you don't feel like folks are growing from the conversation, it is absolutely okay to take yourself out of the conversation. It's not allowing that person to win. It's understanding this person is not learning anymore, and it's absolutely okay to end the conversation. Yeah, if you have any other questions for me, please do. I got one more. Do you have any more advice on the best way to apologize when you misstep? Absolutely. When you misstep, and I use myself when I get misgendered. Sometimes I'll be in a situation and someone will refer to me as she or her, or ladies. I get that a lot, ladies, when I'm being referred to. Sometimes I step in and say something. Sometimes other people step in for me, and sometimes I let it ride. We got battles and wars, and sometimes I just don't want to have to deal with that at that moment. So a lot of times people will come back and say, I am so sorry. I cannot believe I said that. I know better. They're looking for me to absolve them. They're looking for me to say, you know what, it's totally okay, it's fine. All right. So what actually helps me the best when somebody has done something and they're apologizing for that misstep is actually owning and saying, you know what, I totally said the wrong pronoun. I was wrong in that situation. I truly apologize for doing that, and I will make sure I work to not do that again. Please, if it happens again, please call me in. Let's talk through that, so that you're not repeating. And then I'm not put on the spot to kind of have to say, no, it's fine, everything is cool. But being able to say, you know what, I did it and I named it. And then on the flip, if someone comes to you and say, hey, you did this, instead of saying, I didn't try to do that, that wasn't my intention, to say, you know what, I was wrong for doing that. I didn't know that was not my intention, but it does not stop the harm that actually happened to you. So in this, I'll make sure to refrain from, or make sure I'm thinking about this in a different way. If, and please let me know if something else happens. But owning it means so much to disenfranchise people. It means so much to just say, you know what, I was wrong. It wasn't my intention, but it doesn't stop what harmed you. And so if we begin to live like that and we begin to talk like that, it makes it much easier to have these very difficult conversations with each other. But more importantly, it allows us to have grace, because if you can't have grace for yourself, it's really hard for you to have grace for other people. Again, that's why I really want you to talk to each other and get to know each other. Before we close out this session, and again, please, after this is over, I offer my email. I still would love to have conversations with you. If you still have questions that you needed to kind of digest a little bit more, please do not hesitate to reach out to me, and I'll leave all that with Yakima crew for that. But last but not least, a big part of moving through misstep is acknowledging that harm was done, even if unintended. Acknowledging and believing that you may have done something offensive is the first and honestly the most critical role in changing behavior. It's often a scary role to be in. To accept that you have harmed someone through ignorance or bias can be a hard pill to swallow. But I tell you, please swallow it and begin to repair the harm you caused. 4 E's that I want you to walk away from is I want you to educate yourself, build your knowledge base. Hopefully this is not the last time I get to interact with you, but even if it is, please, please, please continue to educate yourself on who you are, your identity, how your identity plays into your work, and what that feels like for you. Expose. Allow yourself to be vulnerable. This is really hard for folks, is to be like, man, I stepped in it. I misstepped. I hurt you. I offended you. it's really hard for people to really be in that vulnerable step because they don't want to be bad people. Where do we learn how to be bad? Socialization, whole nother conversation. Experience. Formally begin a process of understanding yourself as well as educating yourself and others. This is a process. Today is the first day, maybe for some of you, where the process really is taking root. Continue in. It's a marathon. It's not a race. Make sure that you understand that there are going to be twists and turns, high times, low times. Keep to the path. And I guarantee you'll come out great on the other side. Last but not least, edify, uplift, and build up others. Some of the greatest folks I have had a chance to interact with were folks that I didn't even know, but they said my name in rooms of opportunity. And therefore, because of that, I've had a chance to grow, not only within this industry, but within my academic career as well. Continue to edify folks, continue to uplift, continue to build up others. Why? Because when you're able to do that unapologetically, you're able to do it for yourself just as much. And so with that, I thank you. We had some Q&A. If other questions do arise, I definitely want to make sure I'm answering those questions. But more importantly, thank you so much, Yakima, for the opportunity to be with you during this time and having this session. And I hope that you actually learned something from it.
Patrice, we do have one really quick question. If you have any educational resources, podcasts, books that you would recommend as a good kind of starting point to someone's education surrounding DEI.
Yes, I do. So I am actually going to send you, Yakima, I'll send it to you all, and you can send it to your participants, an educational kind of toolkit. And this goes for a lot of different things. So it's pretty robust. And so it will meet you at different levels of your journey. But I got podcasts for you to listen to, as well as books, folks to follow on Instagram that may have some really, really cool content. It's like, hey, I really think I want to learn more from these folks. But yes, I definitely want to give you that as a starting tool. And then as you begin to work that muscle and it begins to get stronger, continue to venture out and get even more. Because again, I've been doing this for almost 20 years. I still don't know half of it. Why? Because people are complex and nuanced and things change. So continue to do the work. So yes, I will be sending that out.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Patrice. This is definitely just such a good topic, important topic for people when they're managing their businesses and managing their personal lives and managing their relationships with their employees and colleagues and things like that. So I really appreciate you coming here. So yeah, we'll be posting all of these resources on the same session webpage as well as the YouTube caption as well. So thank you everyone for joining and have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Awesome.